Well, hi there. This is Robert, and welcome to today's show. And one of the bigger stories in the world of infectious diseases in the United States is it looks like there's a possible human case of plague out in Colorado that has resulted in death. And it's still not confirmed yet, but that's where all the reports are headed. And this is from the San Juan Basin Public Health Department. And it says the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and the San Juan Basin Public Health are investigating a potential case of plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis associated with a recent death of a La Plata County resident. Health officials were notified of the potential case on July 7th and are actively working to support the state health officials who are leading the investigation. The state health department's laboratories conducted more tests to confirm the diagnosis. So what this looks like, it is a human plague death in La Plata County, Colorado. And according to this report from Colorado Public Radio, this is the first, if it turns out to be a plague death, it'll be the first human plague death in 6 years. 2015 was the last time, according to health officials out there. Well, let's take a look at this chart. And it talks about human plague in Colorado for the past 16 years, 2005 to 2020. And Colorado's had 22 human plague cases in that span of time. And if you look down here, La Plata County accounted for 9 of them, nearly half of them. So La Plata County is no stranger to the plague. Asterisk. These are the counties of residence, not necessarily where they are exposed. So just keep that in mind. And each year, right, 22 total cases out of 16 years. Concerning the gender, it's about 60% female, 40% male, and the ages are pretty well spread out through all age brackets. But that's what we're seeing in Colorado. Okay, this is from the CDC, and it talks about plague in the U.S., and this is very interesting. And just as a side note, if you want to learn more about plague in the United States, I did a podcast about 7 or 8 years ago with Dr. Paul Edestad with the New Mexico Department of Health. He was a state veterinarian at the time, an absolute whiz on a lot of these zoonotic diseases. And I'll link to it below if you want to check it out. He is an encyclopedia of plague, hantavirus, and a lot of these other types of infections. So I encourage you to check that out. Anyway, back to the CDC website here, where they say plague was first introduced in the U.S. in 1900 by rat-infested steamships that had sailed from affected areas, mostly from Asia. Epidemics occurred in port cities. The last urban plague epidemic in the U.S. occurred in Los Angeles from 1924 to 1925. Plague then spread from urban rats to rural rodent species and became entrenched in many areas of the western United States. Yeah, we see that in prairie dogs and stuff like that in the western U.S. Most human cases in the U.S. occur in 2 regions: northern New Mexico, northern Arizona, and southern Colorado, and also California, southern Oregon, and far western Nevada. And 8 out of 10 plague cases in the U.S. are bubonic, and we'll talk about the different forms of plague very soon. We usually see about 7 plague cases in humans annually in the country, with a range of about 1 to 17. And here's a good map, kind of gives you a good picture of where we've seen human plague cases since 1970. And you can see how it's really bunched up here in southern Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and then up and down the Pacific coast. So that's really where you really see a lot of the plague cases. almost never does it leave the Southwest in the western part of the United States. And this chart, it kind of goes over plague cases and deaths in people in the U.S. for the past 2 decades. Okay, next. This is actually a little old. It's dated. It's from July 2005, but this is a public health update. And it has some interesting information concerning plague in Colorado. I just wanted to share that with you. It says the incidence of plague in non-human species in Colorado is changing. Remember, this is 15, 16 years ago. From 1947 through 1989, Colorado ranked 5th in the country for plague activity. From 1990 through 1999, it ranked 2nd, and the incidence is expected to continue to rise. Due to recent wet springs and mild winters, 2015 is predicted to be an active plague year. And it says here the state of Colorado averages 2 human plague cases annually on average. So that's some specific information, though it's a little dated, for the state of Colorado. And it says, as of 1999, Colorado was ranked number 2 in plague activity. And what have we seen so far in 2021? We've seen this report out of El Paso County, where multiple squirrels died of suspected plague in that county. And that was one of the early reports of the year. This was back in May. And then as recent as last Tuesday, this is San Miguel County. This is out of a local newspaper. It says on Tuesday, a domestic cat tested positive for the plague at a local veterinarian hospital in San Miguel County. The cat was hospitalized, tested, and treated, and is recovering well. No fleas were found during treatment, and those who handled the cat did not experience high-risk exposures, though we'll monitor for symptoms for the next week. So, yeah, so Colorado is seeing animal plague and apparently a human plague case. And let me go ahead and close out with a couple points of information concerning transmission. And there's several ways plague can be transmitted to people. Most common one is flea bites. It says, during plague epizootics, many rodents die, causing hungry fleas to seek other sources of blood. People and animals that visit places where rodents have recently died from plague are at risk of being infected from flea bites. Dogs and cats may also bring plague-infected fleas into the home. Flea bite exposure may result in primary bubonic plague or septicemic plague. You can also contract it via contaminated fluids. Humans can become infected when handling tissue or body fluids of a plague-infected animal, like a hunter skinning a rabbit, for example. And this exposure also results in either bubonic or septicemic plague. And infectious droplets is the third one they list. When a person has plague pneumonia, they may cough droplets containing the plague bacteria into the air. If these bacteria containing droplets are breathed in by another person, they can cause pneumonic plague. Typically, this requires direct and close contact with a person with pneumonic plague. So we are talking about person-to-person transmission of plague in the form of pneumonic plague. And in the U.S., we haven't seen this in about 100 years. But we do see this in other countries, parts of Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Madagascar, a lot of these other countries. It says here, cats are particularly susceptible to plague and can become infected by eating infected rodents. So that's why we do seem to see a lot of reports of domestic cats catching the plague out west during this time of year. And lastly, the forms of plague. And we got bubonic up here, septicemic, and of course pneumonic. And I just want to go over this real quick. If you're not familiar, plague is not this one thing. It's a multitude of different illnesses. Bubonic plague, patients develop sudden onset of fever, headache, chills, and weakness, with one or more swollen, tender, painful lymph nodes called buboes. This form usually results from the bite of an infected flea. And this can be fatal if it's not treated with antibiotics in a quick basis. More serious, septicemic plague. Again, a lot of the same symptoms: fever, chills, weakness, abdominal pain, shock, and possibly bleeding into the skin and other organs. Skin and other tissues may turn black and die, especially the extremities, fingers and toes, and the nose. Septicemic plague can occur as the first symptom of plague, or may develop from untreated bubonic plague. So this is incredibly serious and likely fatal without treatment with antibiotics. And then there's pneumonic plague, right? The one that you can transmit from person to person. A lot of the same symptoms and a rapidly developing pneumonia, shortness of breath, chest pain, cough, and sometimes bloody or watery mucus. Pneumonic plague may develop from inhaling infectious droplets or may develop from untreated bubonic or septicemic plague after the bacteria spreads to the lungs. The pneumonia may cause respiratory failure and shock, and this is the most serious form of plague. And like I already said, it's the only form that can be transmitted person to person. Okay, so we'll be keeping a close eye out in Colorado, looking for confirmation of this person that they believe died from plague. And we'll be reporting on that on the website outbreaknewstoday.com or here on the YouTube channel. Anyway, appreciate you watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment below, share it with your friends, and I'll see you next time.